There's this competition between Jordan and Scalise, you know, between the guy who covered up a sex scandal and the guy who is David Duke without the baggage. There is some speculation that the Republicans will just say, screw it, let's go back with Kevin McCarthy. We'll see. And, you know, there's some small possibility that the Democrats will ride to the rescue. So, you know, keep your eye on all these things. We'll see how all this shakes out. Why Trump and the GOP are burning the entire system down is the headline of the article I wrote over at HartmannReport.com today. And, you know, what I'm pointing out is that what we're seeing, and I think that, you know, even the dysfunction that I was just discussing in the there's this competition between Jordan and Scalise, you know, between the guy who covered up a sex scandal and the guy who is David Duke without the baggage. There is some speculation that the Republicans will just say, screw it, let's go back with Kevin McCarthy. We'll see. And, you know, there's some small possibility that the Democrats will ride to the rescue. So, you know, keep your eye on all these things. We'll see how all this shakes out. Why Trump and the GOP are burning the entire system down is the headline of the article I wrote over at HartmannReport.com today. And, you know, what I'm pointing out is that what we're seeing, and I think that, you know, even the dysfunction that I was just discussing in the House of Representatives is symptomatic of this, or arguably even causal, is that there are three factions in the United States who want to destroy the American government. They want to replace our government with basically nothing, with you know, giant corporations and billionaires. You know, all government functions that have to do with helping people out, you know, welfare programs, food programs, education, scholarships, all that. They want to replace all that with private philanthropy so that we all have to go hat in hand begging billionaires for things. Basically, they're trying to recreate the world that Charles Dickens documented. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. So you've got the right-wing billionaires who are trying to do that, and then you've got the MAGA people who are trying to tear down American democracy. You know, the right-wing billionaires are, you know, they're sort of okay with democracy as long as they can buy it. You know, now that you've got Citizens United, they're quite happy with that. But, you know, then you've got the MAGA people who want to basically have a dictatorship in the United States. They want Donald Trump to be, you know, the one and only, the king of America, you know, until the day he dies. And then, you know, replace him with some other king of America. So that's the second group. And then the third group are the people who are overtly dancing to the tune of Vladimir Putin and Russia and other autocratic regimes around the world. And that group, excuse me, and that group is, you know, very much out there promoting the idea that we should stop aiding Ukraine, you know, well, in fact, Josh Hawley, the traitor from Missouri, the guy who gave the fist bump, the fist in the air to the January 6th insurrectionists. Josh Hawley just tweeted that we should take all our aid to Ukraine and give it to Israel instead. Cut off Ukraine. Just hand them to Russia. Right? So, you know, you've got the Putin caucus in the Senate and in the House. And, you know, this is what they're all about. So you got these three groups that want to tear down the country. Steve Bannon talked about this when he was an advisor, a Trump advisor in the White House in 2017. He said that he wanted to deconstruct the administrative state. He said that's all going to be deconstructed. And I think that's why this regulatory thing is so important, that, you know, tear down the regulatory agencies. The fossil fuel billionaires don't want the EPA around anymore. The construction billionaires, you know, like the guy who basically bought Clarence Thomas. They don't want regulations of real estate and the housing industry. I mean, this just goes on and on. It's all over the place. Pardon me. And I would say I'm having an allergy problem, but I don't think that's the time of year for it. I don't know why my nose is running. Anyway, in this, the GOP, Putin, and the fossil fuel billionaires are all, you know, working toward the same goal. And one of their favorite memes is that democracy is not natural. If you look at the history of the human race, you see that it's always been, you know, strongman autocrats and that kind of thing. And there is some truth to that. But if you look, I wrote about this in The Hidden History of American Democracy, if you look at other animal species, what you find from gnats to fish to geese to red deer, what you find is that they make decisions using a democratic process, small d democratic process. So now we're seeing this played out in the United States. This, do we have a social democracy kind of government like you have in the blue states? Or do you have a, 1890s British-style government, like Dickens wrote about, which we see in the red states? And this is why in the red states, in the fully GOP-controlled red states, low-income working people don't have access to Medicaid. Public education is under attack with voucher programs. Women can't get an abortion. There are a few scholarship programs for higher education, so everybody goes in debt if they want to go to college. Districts are so gerrymandered that voting is largely symbolic. Union rights are non-existent. Guns have more protections than children. Meanwhile, in blue states, and that red state model is what the Republican Party wants for all of America. Meanwhile, in the blue states, women live as much as so do men, by the way, about that. Overall life expectancy is as high as in Denmark, whereas in the red states is as low as Serbia. Cancer rates are lower. The cancer rate in California is 358 per 100,000 people. In Kentucky, it's 504 per 100,000. Heart disease can be as much as 5 times lower in blue states than in red states. Children are less likely to die from gunfire in blue states. A child in Massachusetts is 1/10 as likely to die by gunfire as in Mississippi. People have measurably higher levels of primary school graduation and achievement. The vast majority of people are fully insured for health care. Babies and new mothers are less likely to die than in red states. Food insecurity is rare compared to red states. Obesity and chronic disease rates are much lower than in red states, and rates of hypertension are lower in blue states than in red states. I mean, the list goes on and on. You can Google just about any, measurable index of quality of life, and you'll find that blue states are beating red states. The one exception is taxation and cost of living, where red states beat blue states. But hey, if you want to live on the cheap, then you end up with all these consequences that I just laid out. And now this war against American institutions is going full bore. I mean, the Republicans are talking about putting a guy who, according to the January 6th committee, was the most involved in January 6th, Jim Jordan, as Speaker of the House, to cripple our government. They're right now, Republicans in the Senate are blocking confirmation of our diplomats, including our ambassador to Israel, promotions for our military, and appointees to the Departments of Energy, State, Veterans Affairs, and Justice. Republicans in the House are refusing to move forward appropriations legislation because they want to shut the government down on November 17th. Republicans in red states are purging city-dwelling voters from the voting rolls by the millions. Republicans in the Supreme Court have stripped away protections against bribery. Republicans are even telling the media outrageous lies, some so bad that even Fox News hosts can't stomach them. Bottom line here, the next 15 months are going to determine whether going forward, America is going to look more like red states or like Russia, or are we going to look more like blue states, like California, like Massachusetts? And, it's up to you and me, ultimately. The billionaires are going to be pouring a ton of money into this election, but ultimately, this may be our last opportunity 15 months from now to vote. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and video media online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon-Chan Rah. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's the day before the day of the end of the week, right? It's Thursday. It's a mini Friday, I guess. And we got a lot to talk about today. How will America weather the historic times we are facing? Also, a Hamas leader cheered for joy from his office in Qatar after the deadly attack on Israel. Wait a minute. The Hamas leadership is in Qatar? Qatar that bailed out Jared Kushner to the tune of $1 billion? We'll get to that in a moment. Also, Tommy Tuberville and Donald Trump continue their pattern of complimenting our enemies. Now they're both hearting Hezbollah. Seriously. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. And Crazy Albert, seriously? Tommy Tuberville called the cops over a mean tweet? In the second hour of our program, Phil Ittner, our one guest for the day, is going to drop by and give us an update on what's going on in Ukraine. Also, is the massive prehistoric solar storm a warning for Earth? An interesting geeky science here. In the third hour of our program, the Department of Justice is suing eBay in a crackdown on rolling coal devices. Also, voting rights had a bad day in the Supreme Court yesterday. And another crazy alert, Fox attacks climate change instead of Hamas. Seriously, you can't make this stuff up. It's just incredible. My op-ed to, I guess I'll get to Trump in just a moment. This is just crazy stuff. But my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, How Will America Weather the Historic Times We Face? I mean, we're living right now, let's just be honest about this. Let's be clear about this. We are living right now in one of those hinge points of history, one of those moments where people, where people gauge events by whether they happen before it or after it, like, before 9/11, after 9/11, before World War II, after World War II. That's where we are right now. This is, and I'm not just talking about the war in Israel. You've got the war in Ukraine. You've got the possibility that China could vaporize Taiwan. We've got the civic institutions in every democracy in the world are under assault from trolls and bots that are showing up on social media because the social media companies are unwilling to pay for content moderation. You've got climate change that could soon render large parts of the planet uninhabitable. Half of the plants and animals on Earth right now are on the verge of extinction. Here in America, Donald Trump and his MAGA army are daily threatening violence against their perceived enemies. Right-wing billionaires are funding programs designed to destroy social democracy in America. And, they're getting success after success with their bought-off legislatures and wined and dined judges and justices. And the neo-fascist media in America are spoon-feeding a steady diet of hate and fear on 1,500 radio stations nationwide and billionaire-owned television platforms. I mean, these are moments that are pregnant with danger, but also with possibility. These are moments that require exceptional and far-sighted leadership. They require statesmanship rather than politics, a commitment to the general welfare rather than just me, my, the personal and tribal self-interest that we so often see from our politicians. I mean, after all, this generation of Americans may well determine the fate and future of the United States and by extension, all around the world. If our democracy falls 13 months from now in the next election, and there's a possibility it will if Donald Trump gets elected or if Republicans take control of the Senate, if our democracy falls, the United States will almost certainly go neo-fascist, just like Russia did, just like Hungary did, just like Egypt did, just like Turkey did, just like the Philippines did. I mean, country after country has gone down this road. And as the result, you know, authoritarianism and oligarchy will spread all around the world like, you know, some kind of fungus on an orange. I mean, this is where we're at. When Lauren Boebert, during the January 6th attack, tweeted, "This is 1776," she was right. She didn't realize how she was right, but this really is one of those hinge points in history. And these people who are, you know, trying to tear down social democracy in America and turn America into, you know, something like, I don't know, Sudan or something, you know, a poverty-stricken Central or South American country. I mean, this is essentially what these billionaires want. You know, no more social safety net, no more free education, no more, you know, hospitalization or excuse me, health care, no more Medicare, no more Medicaid, no more Social Security. This is what they want. They want to turn America into a third world country. Over at popular.info, Judd Legum is documenting how you know, one of these billionaires just moved $5 billion into a fund to basically, you know, crank Republican politics. The guy who oversaw the packing of our Supreme Court is sitting on over $1 billion. You know, the Democratic Party has moved fairly steadily in the last 6, 7, 8 years away from Reagan's neoliberalism. They had embraced it, you know, I'll give you that, during the Clinton and Obama administrations, but Biden is moving away from this, as are the Democrats in Congress. But the Republican Party has gone all in on this agenda that America's oligarchs have laid out before them, an agenda of racial and regional hate, an agenda of denying climate change, an agenda of suppressing the vote. You know, there's an old saying that's been attributed both to Alexander Hamilton and Malcolm X, that if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And that's today's Republican Party. I mean, the Republican Party right now is trying to come up with a Speaker of the House, right? You've got one guy who's accused of covering up sex crimes and another guy who calls himself David Duke without the baggage. Patrick McHenry, the Republican who is currently the temporary Speaker of the House, this bow tie wearing guy from North Carolina, he took in more than 90% of his campaign money from lobbyists for the industries that he basically regulates as chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. So far this year, he's taken in $856 from small dollar donors, over $1 million from you know, these financial services companies that he writes legislation that can control. I mean, you know, Teddy Roosevelt is rolling in his grave. And when you look at what has happened, you know, who has done what? I mean, you know, Jim Jordan is the other candidate, is a candidate for Speaker of the House. He's been in Congress 16 years. He has gone from being an Ohio wrestling coach to being worth over $30 million. And in that 16 years, he has sponsored 4 pieces of legislation, none of which became law. Republicans don't believe in government. They want billionaires to run the country. They want to take America back to that Charles Dickens world. On the other hand, Democrats are saying, you know, government can do things for the people. I mean, in the past 3 years, the Democrats passed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. They passed the child tax credit, $1,400 a month to help with food and rent, provided small businesses with $7 billion in loans, distributed $128 billion in aid to education to the states. Biden signed a $1 trillion infrastructure program. The CHIPS and Science Act, $53 billion to bring our manufacturing, our high-tech manufacturing back to the United States. The Inflation Reduction Act, capping Medicare prescription drug costs at $2,000 a year, We're modernizing the IRS, reducing greenhouse gases, slowing inflation. You know, these accomplishments show that when you put Democrats in charge, as they were for the first 2 years of the Biden administration, we can actually get things done. We can put America back on track. But once the Republicans come in, guess what? You know, we are just a month away from a shutdown of the federal government again. They are refusing to fund Ukraine, a democracy that is struggling. They are, now you've got Republicans trash-talking Israel, Tommy Tuberville and Donald Trump yesterday. I'll get to that in a minute. At the state level, the Republicans, you know what? Well, you know, if they're not going to pass laws, what do? Well, they are actually passing laws at the state level. They've outlawed abortion in half of America. They've put in place more than 300 restrictions on voting rights. They've gerrymandered state after state so tightly that red state elections basically have become meaningless. I mean, the leading Republican candidate for president of the United States is a convicted rapist, serial adulterer, convicted con man, and a traitor who tried to overthrow our government. His main opponent for the nomination, Ron DeSantis, day before yesterday was asked, you know, should Republican candidates have dinner with white supremacist Holocaust deniers? And they had to ask him the question 4 times to get a straight answer. He was so afraid of offending white supremacist Holocaust deniers. Ron DeSantis, seriously. Now, there's still hope for a revival in America of decency, trust, compassion, and democracy. In 13 months, we're going to go to the polls, and this is going to decide the fate and future of America and much of the rest of the world. We owe it to our children and our grandchildren to get ready for this election, to wake people up, to inform people, to double-check our voting registration, particularly if you live in a city in a red state, because these are the areas where they're most aggressively purging people from the voting rolls. There's still hope. We can do this, but we've got to act. I'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Trump and Tuberville attacking Israel right now? Seriously? I'll be right back with that. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Tom in Irvine, California. Hey, Tom, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Yes. I'm sorry. Last week I called and I made that dark reference to Reagan with the being elected in the year ending in 0. And if I made you feel uncomfortable, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's all. It's a real thing, Tom. You didn't make me feel uncomfortable. The idea that something could happen to Biden makes me feel uncomfortable. But, you know, hey. Okay, yeah. It is what it is.
And that's what I'm leading up to. You always mention the fourth turning every now and then, and we're like 2024 is exactly 80 years from 1944, which was exactly 80 years from 1864, and Lincoln and Roosevelt almost died 80 years apart to the day.
Yeah, and that was 80 years. That was 80 years after 1774.
Right. And so my concern is, so Lincoln needed to get reelected in 1864, and he abandoned his vice president, who was, a big supporter of, the progressive Republican Party,
right.
And brought in Andrew Johnson, which, caused all problems. And then in 1944, FDR had Henry Wallace as his vice president, but the right-wingers pushed for Truman. And, who knows what would have turned out, how things would have turned out if Wallace was our president.
Yeah.
And, my concern now is Biden is going to try and appeal to the right wing and shift to the right, not necessarily with a VP choice, but with policies. So
I don't think so. I'm not seeing any evidence of that.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right.
I mean, this war in Israel has kind of thrown everything for a loop. But Biden, as far as I can tell, is very committed to being this generation's Franklin Roosevelt. I'm not seeing any indication that he's gonna waffle like Bill Clinton did or Barack Obama did. Obama was willing to cut Social Security because of Gingrich and his buddies going after him. Bill Clinton cut welfare programs, in fact, devastated welfare programs.
But what about his attempt to, when the 2024 election gets close, do you think you might shift to the right on these policies just to assure you being reelected?
I don't. I really don't. I mean, if you're looking for a signal like that, I think the closest you're going to get is his deciding that he's actually going to build some border wall. And you could call that a shift to the right. I think it's an acknowledgement that the Democratic mayors of a half a dozen Democratic cities, just went to Washington, D.C. and begged him to do something, because the Republicans are shipping all these refugees into their cities. And, it's just a major crisis. But, I think that's as close as you're going to get, Tom. I get it Republicans tend to move to the left just before the election, and Democrats often tend to move to the right. And we'll see. I mean, it's 13 months away. There's still a lot of time. But I think Biden's pretty solid. I think he's, committed to who he is and what he's going to do. Tom, I got to run, but thank you for the call and the reminder about the fourth attorney. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies. Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. And voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university level who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at hartmanreport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. This is something I just learned this morning, and I don't know how I missed this before, but Israel right now is bombing the crap out of Gaza to try to wipe out Hamas and take out and recover the American and Israeli hostages that are being held there, and of course Biden is sending the Fifth Fleet over there. They're not there yet, but they're on their way. But what I didn't know is that the headquarters of Hamas is in Qatar. Yeah, the country that bailed out Jared Kushner's 555 or 666 Fifth Avenue building. That country. The country that is the headquarters for the U.S. Fifth Fleet. And in fact, this is a news story from The Express, the British newspaper. The headline, Hamas leader cheered for joy from Qatar office while after deadly attack on Israel. Really? And this guy's still walking around loose? This is the story. The leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, reportedly followed the group's deadly attack on Israel on TV from his office in Qatar. Following news of the destruction and deaths spread by the terrorist group, Mr. Haniyeh cheered for joy before he and other Hamas officials prostrated on the floor to praise God. The group chief has been staying in Doha for a number of years. On Saturday, the Qatari Foreign Ministry blamed Tel Aviv for the devastating attacks carried out by Hamas. Wait a minute, really? Qatar? saying Israel was, quote, solely responsible for the ongoing escalation due to its continuous violations of the rights of the Palestinian people, including the recent repeated incursions into the Al-Aqsa Mosque under the protection of the Israeli police, end quote. The Foreign Ministry of Qatar called on the international community to, quote, compel Israel to cease its blatant violations of international law, abide by international legitimacy resolutions, respect the historical rights of the Palestinian people. Well, you know, it's not unreasonable to call for Israel to follow international law. I'm all in favor of that, too. But saying that in the context of Hamas killing Israelis is somewhere between bizarre and reprehensible. Meanwhile, Donald Trump yesterday had a rally, and at his rally, he called Hezbollah, which is attacking Israel right now from the north, from Lebanon, he called Hezbollah very smart. This was on Brian Kilmeade's show on Fox News. He said, you know, Hezbollah is very smart. They're all very smart. And then Ron DeSantis tries to use that for political points against Trump. He says it's absurd that anyone, much less someone running for president, would choose now to attack our friend and ally Israel, much less praise Hezbollah terrorists as very smart. But, you know, Trump has been praising Putin, praising Kim Jong-un, praising MBS for a long, long time. Trump elaborated in a speech Wednesday, last night. He said that he had a very bad experience with Israel as president, and told the story of how when he was trying to assassinate General Soleimani, you know, the Iranian guy, that Israeli intelligence helped the U.S. locate him and plan the drone strike. And he says, I'll never forget that Bibi Netanyahu let us down. That was a terrible thing. We were also very disappointed by that. Attacking Netanyahu, it's just, and then Tommy Tuberville comes along. This is yesterday also. Tommy Tuberville says, this has been really bad. Israel has a right to go because they came in and did some terrible things to their country. But the problem is when you start picking sides in the Middle East, it can get really messy really quick, very quick. Yeah, we shouldn't pick sides in the Middle East. Really? Incredible. Incredible. What say you? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's talk media for the sane among us. We'll be right back with your calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? VJ wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, "The fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted, and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. Well, President Biden has finally come out and, well, not finally, I mean, there was just last night that Trump was praising Hezbollah, but Biden just came out and said, you know, the right time to praise terrorists is never. This is our Republican Party. They love terrorists. They love Putin. They love Hezbollah. They love Hamas. Oh, man. And now Tommy Tuberville. Tommy Tuberville is having a moment. This is the guy who has kneecapped our military on behalf of Putin and Trump. He says he's doing it because he doesn't want women who are serving our military who get raped to be able to fly to locations where abortions are legal. He wants raped military service women to be forced to carry their babies to term, right? Their pregnancies to term. That's Tommy Tuberville. And, you know, he's kind of being criticized for that. But there's been a few other things. A couple of days ago, he made a smart-ass crack about how any day now, Joe Biden is going to fall down the stairs and that'll be the end of him, or words to that effect, Joe Biden falling. And so now somebody on the internet found some old footage of Tommy Tuberville sliding down some stairs as he's getting off the airplane, and it's gone completely viral. It's all, you know, TikTok, Twitter, Insta, it's everywhere. And in fact, now they're coming up with versions of it where they're taking him falling down the stairs on this airplane and putting him on, you know, on the Great Pyramid and falling down the stairs, all kinds of weird stuff. But now it's even gotten to the point of, you know, like theater of the absurd. General Michael Hayden, retired Air Force general and former Central Intelligence Agency director, Michael Hayden, responded to a tweet from Tuberville, who said that, well, it wasn't from Tuberville, it was about Tuberville. It was a tweet that said Tuberville should be removed from his committee assignments because he's messing with our military. And Hayden said, how about the human race? Now, you know, he's clarified. He said, you know, he meant it tongue in cheek. He was asked, he was also asked if Tuberville was a racist, and he said, what I meant to say is that Tommy Tuberville absolutely is a racist, said Michael Hayden. So Tommy Tuberville got all offended by this and reported General Michael Hayden, the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, to the Capitol Police for saying that this was a death threat. That he shouldn't be, that Tuberville shouldn't be considered part of the human race. He says, if we still have a non-political justice system in this country, then General Hayden will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Oh, my God. The coach. This is, you know, Tuberville was, you know, a football coach, right? I mean, this is his claim to fame. This is what he does. This is who he is, apparently. Not a very bright man. This is just bizarre. Anyhow, let's pick up your calls and see what's on your mind today. Mark in Las Vegas. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hi, yes. Let me take it off speakerphone here. Sorry about that. There we go. That's better. Hey, how you doing this morning, Tom? I'm doing well as long as we're talking about sane things. Unfortunately, the Republican Party exists so that we have to discuss all of the craziness out there. I'm really disappointed in the mainstream media. So, for instance, when they talk about Steve Scalise, they seem to leave off his self-description consistently, which is David Duke without the baggage.
They also failed to mention that he's a climate denier and that he opposed and that he voted against certifying the 2020 election. He voted with Trump. You know, he went with Trump on overthrowing the government of the United States. And you know, go ahead, Mark. I interrupted.
Where do you? Oh no, that's okay. Where do you stop when describing the absolute insanity on the right? Yeah. I just saw an ex post from a Massey saying, "Who do you prefer between Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise?" And my response was, "Neither. I would like a sane candidate. Thank you."
Yeah, it's like saying, would you prefer to have malaria or cancer?
Boy, what a choice.
Yeah,
let me think about
malaria
that.
Or dengue fever. You have a choice.
Yeah, well, I'll take the one that can be solved with a vaccine that they don't believe in. How's that?
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, you know, but anyway, again, though, it's just the mainstream media is just a laughable excuse of what the forefathers thought it should be. It was supposed to hold government accountable. And last time I checked, Republicans are in government. Yeah. You know what the old saying is? We've heard this, and that is, you know, Republicans are the party that believe all government is bad and then get elected and prove it.
Yeah. And it's not a joke, sadly. I mean, it's, you know, it was.
Yeah, I wish it were.
Yeah.
You know, there was a really good book that came out that I got my wife to read as well. Profiles in Ignorance. And it discusses Republicans going back to Nixon, maybe even before him. And people would be shocked, actually, if they could read that book and understand just how stupid everybody from Nixon to Reagan to Bush Sr., Bush Jr., and the Trumpmeister actually are.
Yeah.
It gets swept under the rug. The mainstream media, again, just doesn't seem to want to quote what these people are actually about. They do a grave disservice to the public.
Yeah, that's a book by Andy Borowitz. Is it a serious book? I mean, Borowitz is a comedian.
Yeah, it's a serious book. It's well done, well researched. And you know what? I think even you might be surprised by some of the things you've either forgotten or maybe just got glossed over and never really heard much about just how terrible these people were.
Yeah.
So any callers that call in, please go read that book and then tell me why anybody should vote Republican.
Profiles in Ignorance by Borowitz. Okay, thank you, Mark. Thanks for the call. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
Well, I have a pretty serious statement I want to make, and I want to make it as sensitively as I possibly can, Tom. You know, we have hot spots, if you will, all over the world right now. Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, in Africa, or El-Kebulon. We have the situation in Ukraine. We have what's going on in Israel. The world is the world's a hot mess right now. And when I say what I'm about to say, I am not indicting white people. None of us are responsible for our ethnicity or how we look or our gender. But this conversation has to be elevated because white supremacy has nothing to do with what an individual looks like. White supremacy is a state of mind, and I know that you are aware that I've talked about this many times. And as one of our greatest thinkers, and I'm talking about you in this country, you know, let's damn the politics, Tom. I don't have any politics. I have the politics of humanity. But if you look at all of these situations, if you take out the element of white supremacy, my question is, do they exist? They don't. They don't.
Give me an example.
Take out the element.
What you're talking about.
If you take out the element of white supremacy in Mali and Burkina Faso and all those hot spots in Africa, you do not have those situations. If you take
I thought the wars in Mali were between essentially black people, between Africans.
They are, but they are a result of colonialists coming in and taking resources. Yeah. And that's what I'm getting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I get what you're saying.
If you look at the situation between North and South Korea, if you take out the element, I'm not talking about individuals.
Right.
If you take out the element of white supremacy, does it exist? If you look at the
Korea has historically been a nation separate from the other Asian nations around it. The Koreans consider themselves a race separate. That long precedes any colonialism.
I'm not getting at that, Tom. I'm talking about the fact that when the United States, the Korean Peninsula was one, it was Korea.
Yeah.
Now you have North and South. You have the same situation in Israel. When I look at the situation in Israel right now, or Palestine, however you want to look at it, depending on perspective, when I look at that, I mean, as a black person in the United States, I look at that and I'm seeing the white supremacist element. You can't not see it. And that is why so many black people in this country that at least the ones that I know, we have some empathy for the Palestinians because we see things differently. Now, understand that Europeans, also known as white people, are 12% of the world's population. You can't kill us all. Again, I'm not trying to individualize this. I know I'm talking to a person that is a person I admire. I would admire you no matter what you look like. I'm not indicting people because of what they look like. I'm talking about the state of mind. And my question is to you, if you took this element out of white supremacy, I'm talking domestic politics. You talked about it in your preamble for the show. If you took that element out, would the world be in as dire a shape it is right now?
Oh, I think the answer is clearly no. I agree with you.
No, it would not. And that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah,
no,
from the doctrine of discovery forward. Yeah, absolutely. And long before that, for that matter. But yes.
And that's what I want for humanity to get to.
Yeah.
That's what has to be stamped out. That has to be stamped out. And so enough with that rant. And then I wanted to ask you a question that's kind of on a lighter note. You said something on your program about a week ago, and you were talking about Trump. And I had always wondered about, I'm fascinated by body language. And Trump has some very interesting body language. And I know that you are a psychotherapist or you once were. And so you're familiar with, the importance of body language. And I had always, when he brackets his hands, I had always wondered what that was. And I had tried to find a way to verbalize what that was. And you said accordion hands.
Right.
And I thought about that, and I said, yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what he's doing. My question to you is, has anyone ever studied his body language, and what exactly, as a psychotherapist, what is he doing when he does that? Do you know?
I don't know. That's a good question, Kenyatta. I just don't know. It's kind of a tick of his.
It is.
And I think that it goes back to his salesman days, where he's essentially, the gesture is essentially, I have something here and I'm offering it to you, right, with his hands. And this is a common thing that you see with people who are trying to convince people of other things, or and particularly trying to sell people other things. And so, my guess is that it's, some kind of a variation like that on basically a salesman, thing. But it's not a classic, there's, like people touch their nose or touch their face. Typically,
Right.
It means they're lying or they're uncertain of what they're saying. I mean, there are a bunch of tells out there that any poker player knows. But
that's very unique.
Yeah,
people in banks fold their hands because it's my money. I'm folding my hands. My
right.
arms. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I don't know, Kenyatta.
Anyway.
I got to run. Hang on just a second.
Okay, man.
Hang on.
Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Let me recommend to people that you go over to Substack.com and plug in Kenyatta's name, and you're going to find a fascinating newsletter. Kenyatta, thank you for the call. And welcome back. Jim in Auburn, New York. Hey, Jim, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
We talked before about the Democrats getting more towards the center. I called before about the border and the immigration and what they're doing in New York City, overrunning us, and the cost of all this. And also you mentioned Bill Clinton and cutting welfare. I mean, I think welfare needs to be reformed. I mean, the guy works hard all day, goes to the store, sees somebody that's able-bodied that should be working, buying everything they want, and paying with food stamps.
Yeah, but I get it. I remember when Reagan said, the young buck standing in front of you in the line, with his steak and his champagne, and you're paying for it with food stamps. I get that, Jim, but what are you going to do in a place like rural West Virginia where there simply are no jobs?
All right, listen, this is my concept. If you're getting food, get a diet that's good for you, because I see people that are overweight, obese, buying soda-in chips and everything, and that's just adding to the cost of their medical. Get them evaluated, have them get a physical, get a meal plan for them, and deliver them meals to their house. Because I know people...
That would cost a hell of a lot more than food stamps. And and talk about nanny state. I mean, you know, now you're telling people what they can eat?
Well, if you want to be on welfare, you should be accountable.
I don't think so.
I mean, I see people. I know
think
people
this is
that are
this is a
getting
matter
welfare.
of, you know, preventing hunger in parts of the country where there's hunger. I would take it to the next step and say that in those areas where there is persistent hunger, and they tend to be mostly red states, but they're all over the country, that in those areas where there is no job, where there are no jobs, and where, you know, people basically don't have options, and you know, everything seems relatively hopeless, that those are areas that are ripe for development. And I realize this has been a neoliberal argument for a lot of years. Oh yeah, sure, let's you know, just give government money to big corporations and billionaires, and they'll go in and they'll open a business there, and they'll hire local people and all that kind of thing. I think that, you know, probably government can do it itself, but, you know, maybe that's the way to do it. I don't know. We should have a debate about that. But we haven't had an honest debate, Jim, in this country about poverty since the 1960s. And we need to have one.
Well, look, you know, I understand people that can't do for themselves. I get that. You got people that are laughing, enjoying the system. I know a guy that he'll give somebody $50. They'll go in and get them $100 worth of groceries on their welfare, and they're all happy. I mean, you know, I know a guy that's spent 50 years of his life, he's nothing wrong with him, on welfare. People on Medicaid have better
You can't do that. Welfare is term limited at 5 years and has been since the 90s, Jim. So I'm kind of skeptical about the guy you know. Well, that was Bill Clinton's big contribution. He term limited welfare. You cannot be on virtually all of these assistance programs for more than 5 years. Also, he put work requirements on most of them. I mean, you know, the welfare system today is a radically different thing than it was in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, or throughout the 80s, actually. It was in the 90s and it wasn't just Clinton. I mean, you know, it was Newt Gingrich and the Republican Congress that made these changes, and they're substantial. Some of them were very much needed. You know, in some ways, the system was filled with abuse. On the other hand, you know, they've hurt a lot of people. We'll be back. It's 51 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds, and we'll continue picking up your calls. Stay tuned. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the rest of us. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. You know, one of the grand questions that political scientists have been scratching their heads over for years in America is, why do right-wing billionaires fund anti-black history movements? Why are they pouring money into these people? Why are they funding anti-trans movements? I mean, what does this have to do with being a billionaire? Well, it turns out it has a lot to do with it, and here's why. Almost 30 million Americans lack health insurance. 37 million of us live in dire poverty. 1 in 5 of us are illiterate. A quarter of Americans suffer from a diagnosable mental illness and can't get treatment. 316 people are shot every day in America. 44% of us carry student debt. And the billionaires don't want to pay income taxes to deal with any of these problems of society. That's the real issue. If they can get us fighting with each other over black history or over trans people or kids, they win. Then we're not talking about taxing them, raising their taxes to where they should be. There's a whole rant about this over at hartmanreport.com that you can read and see all the stats and all the hot links. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Kenny in Ellensboro, North Carolina. Hey, Kenny, what's on your mind today?
Well, to understand how this so-called leadership of the speakers, well, they're both insurrectionists.
Yeah.
And you've got
Scalise and Jordan, yes, absolutely.
Yes, you got to understand the mode of operation that's really been going on since Reagan. It's dismantle government from inside.
Yep, you're right.
And they want to privatize schools and privatize the post office. That's just a way to dismantle it from the inside.
Yep.
I'm old enough to remember when Khrushchev said, "We will take over America by using your own laws against you from within, and we will take over America without firing a shot. Looks like you're right on to me.
Yeah. Well, Trump is certainly helping him. I'm with you, Kenny. He's certainly helping him.
Well, and Gordon, of course, wouldn't testify on the January 6th. And you look at what all the Republicans are saying now. This coup is not over. We have gone from debating one election to changing the format of the government to a dictatorship.
Yep.
And I don't think the mainstream media wants to say that out loud. David Duke without the baggage, really? We want him?
Yeah. Well, and if you look at Jim Jordan has been in Congress 16 years. He has produced 4 pieces of legislation, none of which passed into law. And he's gone from being, a wrestling coach to being a multi-millionaire from being in Congress. I mean, this is why Republicans go into politics. They go into politics for the money and for the power. They say,
well, you look at what even Reagan and Newt said. Newt said that he wanted to end everything that FDR put in, including Social Security, right down to the child labor laws. Is that not what they're still doing? And look remember, Casey of the CIA said, we will know when our misinformation operation is working when everything the American citizen believes is false.
Yeah, I don't know about Casey saying that, but
those types of
I can.
How do we win?
Yeah, this has been a campaign to deconstruct the administrative state, to do away with social democracy in America, as you correctly point out, to basically roll back the entire New Deal and the entire Great Society. And these guys are absolutely committed to this, to ending Social Security, to privatizing Medicare. They're halfway there, by the way, on privatizing Medicare, thanks to George W. Bush's Medicare Advantage scam that was rolled out in 2003. I realize Medicare Part C goes back to the 90s, but it was the Medicare Advantage label and the whole program came about in 2003. This is their plan. They want to turn America into Mississippi. They want the entire country to be, no labor rights, no union rights, no Medicaid for everybody, no nothing, basically, no education. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from the Strip and Flip selection, as opposed to election, of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman. This is from the chapter Part 1, page 15, Strip. The foundation of election theft is the manipulation of race as a divide and conquer strategy. It began with the first Jim Crow chattel slavery. Slavery in various forms has existed since the dawn of time, but in the colonies of British North America and then in the United States, it took on a uniquely virulent incarnation. Chattel slavery was, of course, a horrific, brutal labor system designed primarily in the American South to power a network of plantations that produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, rice, and other hot weather crops that could be grown in large fields. But it had a larger purpose here. Our peculiar institution, how the founders referred to slavery, was meant to divide black laborers from white in a caste system that would guarantee the rebellion. As we'll see, this originated with the infamous Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 in Virginia, in which indentured servants of both races joined forces. Plantation owners vowed to make sure that that never happened again. When the United States became an independent country, plantation owners also vowed to secure political benefits from their slaves. Thus, they wrote into the Constitution the 3/5 clause that gave slave owners additional representation for their slaves, even though those slaves could not vote. That additional vote count guaranteed that every president from Jefferson to Lincoln either owned slaves or his vice president did, and that the Congress was strongly controlled by slave owners right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. After the Civil War, with formal slavery abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide and conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, we include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut, with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally, there's been an attempt to portray these interventions as benign, meant to bring democracy, progress, and the Christian faith to third world nations. In fact, they've been largely economic in purpose, a dollar democracy to grab other people's resources. The Strip and Flip selection of 2016 by Bob Petrakis and Harvey Wasserman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent based in Kyiv, Ukraine. He's got a very active video blog over on YouTube. Just plug in his name, Philip Ittner, PhilippIttner, 6 letters each name, and you will find it. His Twitter handle is Ittner Philip, or X handle, or whatever you call it. And Phil, welcome back to the program. I'm wondering what's the latest coming out of Ukraine. I saw a headline yesterday that Russia suffered 2 rather consequential strategic defeats in Ukraine in the last 48 hours. I'm sorry, I didn't read into the article. It was it was in the middle of I was in the middle of doing something else and didn't get back to it. But what was that all about?
They've made some advances down south. On the Zaporizhia front, and in addition to that, south of Bakhmut. The advances that they made on the Zaporizhia front, it seems as though might be getting them past some of the Russian defenses, getting them behind those, the earthworks, the landmines, the minefields, the booby traps, all that stuff. We're not sure of that yet, because again, the Ukrainians are advancing methodically, steadily, and slowly on purpose, trying to keep their soldiers alive. But there is some optimism that perhaps they've circled around behind those defensive lines. It is also getting them to a position where they are able to deliver artillery fire on a very important crossroads, a transportation hub called Tokmak, which is strategically very, very important. It's a supply line for the Russians, but it's also a way for the Ukrainian forces, if beyond delivering artillery fire, are able to actually capture that ground, then they will be very, very close to getting to a place where they can disrupt the land bridge that leads to Crimea, and that would be a significant shift in the standing, the strategic and tactical standing of the Ukrainians.
To what extent do these successes owe any thanks, essentially, to Western technology?
I mean, I'm not going to sell it short. It has been significant, certainly in terms of the ammunition that they're getting. The Ukrainians are saying that they still need more actual physical ammunition. The weapon systems that we've sent them, the Bradley fighting vehicles, the German Leopard tanks, some of the other various, armor and artillery that we've sent them is very good, but it's the actual shell that they still need, and they're also still apparently this the position on the ATACMS missile system, which is a round that is used from the HIMARS, which we gave them roughly about a year ago, 10 months, a year ago. They want those longer range ATACMS because it all comes down to the land bridge. And so much of this war is about, Crimea and Sevastopol. And if you can isolate the peninsula, the thinking here is it's going to go a big way towards shifting Russia's take on the war and possibly ruining morale. And back home in Russia, if Crimea is really legitimately threatened, it is thought, and I happen to agree, bring some very serious pressure to bear on Vladimir Putin. I mean, this is territory that Catherine the Great took back when the Sons of Liberty in the colonial army. I mean, this is how far it goes back. If Putin's the one that loses Crimea, he's going to be in real trouble.
Yeah, the Sons of Liberty fighting in America's colonial army. You're talking the 1700s.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. Catherine the Great was a contemporary of George Washington. That's how far that goes back.
Exactly.
And she looms as large in Russia's history as our founding fathers. She was the one that built Russian empire more than any other Russian leader, I would argue. Yeah. And so, if he loses what Catherine took, he's in trouble.
Now, winter is coming, and although I understand that Europe has been unseasonably warm, I don't know if that's been extending to Ukraine. It was 80 degrees, I guess, in Paris yesterday or the day before. But winter fighting, again, this is another article that I read that, I'd like to reality check with you. I believe I read this over Daily Kos, that somebody was arguing that the Russians are using basically very old technology, particularly the tanks and the ground forces. And winter will be a significant impediment for them. Just keeping warm, just making it through the winter will be a struggle for them. Whereas the Ukrainians have, relatively modern American equipment. The Abrams tanks have arrived, I guess, and, other things like that, the troop carriers and whatnot, that have functional heaters and actually work. And so is it possible, I mean, the conventional wisdom, you and I had a conversation about this maybe 2-3 months ago, that winter was going to be a really tough time for the Ukrainians. Obviously, for the civilian population, it will be, as the Russians will probably go back to bombing out, infrastructure, taking out, electricity and things to freeze out the civilians. But what about the military forces?
Well, the military forces, you're right. I mean, they will be, those vehicles do have heaters in them. And, the Challenger tank, the British tank, even has a tea kettle inside it because, the Brits love their tea.
Really?
But it's true. It's true. There's deep, however, let's not discredit some major concerns here. Aside from the vehicles, there is concern about actual warm weather clothing and making sure that that everybody has, stocks, for example. I just had an interview with a person who spent some time on the front, and they're concerned about warm weather clothing. So they're beefing that up. They're asking for more supplies to be sent to them. Most likely they will get it, but they want more warm weather clothing. So just, if for example, if you're a Ukrainian soldier and you get, wounded or in fighting, you get one of your uniforms torn, you're going to have a replacement for it. They need, but you are absolutely 100% right that the Russian soldiers would probably have it even worse than the Ukrainians. As far as how harsh this winter is going to be, last winter was relatively mild. As the seasons are changing now, it's hard to tell. We've had some pretty wet, windy days, which might mean worse things to come. But then today was very mild. So, we are just going to have to, to wait and see what the weather does, and as fickle as the weather can be, especially in this part of the world. But they are preparing for it. They're preparing for it in terms of helping the civilian infrastructure. That there will not be a repeat of last year. They're sure that there will not be a repeat of last winter, when people without heating or electricity for extended periods of time. They're hoping that they'll be able to replace at a quicker rate. Now, also in addition to that, there will be a slowdown to a stoppage of fighting as this transitional period happens, where the heavy weather will come in and the ground will turn to mud. But eventually that mud will freeze. And we have had some comments by the head of military intelligence here that the Ukrainians have no intention of stopping fighting once that transitional period where the mud changes back to frozen ground. They're going to keep fighting. They're going to keep fighting throughout the winter. So this will not stop. It won't. The pace will not be the same as it has been in spring, but it will continue.
What is the impact of this horrible situation in Israel right now? We've got here in the United States, we've got two guys, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, fighting it out to become Speaker of the House. Both of them are taking Putin's side on the war against Ukraine. Neither one of them wants to renew any foreign aid to Ukraine, any military aid to Ukraine. This is a growing thing in the Republican Party as Donald Trump keeps promoting Putin talking points. I'm guessing that the Ukrainians have to be concerned about this, and also, I mean, they've just vanished from the front page of the news.
That's right. That's what they're concerned about, losing support and the world losing focus on what's happening here. But in addition to that, they have made repeated claims that the Russians are distinctly trying to use the conflict in Israel and Gaza to blame the Ukrainians. For example, there's video floating out there that purports to show Ukrainian weapons being used in Gaza, being used by Hamas. And the military intelligence preceded that video getting released by saying, hey, we know this is happening. We know that Russians have been giving captured Western weapons to Hamas. So it's not coming from the Ukrainians, it's coming from the Russians who've captured it. And then they're going to try and use it as
propaganda,
corruption and propaganda and a black market, that the Ukrainians are selling weapons to Hamas. They are not. Also because the weapons that I've seen in those videos, they're not the weapons that we give to Ukraine. And the Ukrainians aren't going to give weapons. They're fighting for their very lives. They have decidedly come down on the side of Israel. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, we had Israeli flags flying all up and down many streets here in Kiev. The chief rabbi of Ukraine has come out with a video just today thanking all the letters of condolences and support coming from Ukrainians from all sectors of Ukraine. So they're worried about dropping off the front pages, but they do support Israel. They just hope that it won't be a massive drain.
I get
most experts say.
And then here we've got idiots like, Josh Hawley, who came out and said, well, let's redirect all that Ukraine aid to Israel. Right.
We can walk and chew gum.
There you go. Thank you. Phil Ittner. Check out his YouTube video blog. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking to you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
A prehistoric solar storm? This is an amazing story. I'll tell you about this right after the break, and I'll be picking up your call. And welcome back. Lamar in Los Angeles. Hey, Lamar, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? How's it going?
Good. What's up?
Good. Listen, I wanted to ask you about the upcoming House Speaker election. Do you think it's possible that if we get a certain amount of votes from some same Republicans and all the Democrats unite behind Hakeem Jeffries or a moderate Republican, can we elect our own speaker. What do you think?
Here's the problem. If any Republicans were to vote for any Democrat, and Hakeem Jeffries would be pretty much the only one that the Democrats would go along with because he's the minority leader, you know, he's the Democrats' guy. They would lose their next primary election and you'd never see them again. You're not going to find a single Republican who's going to do that. On the Democratic side, the Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries himself has come out and said, yes, we are willing to vote for a rational Republican. We're willing to collaborate with you. We're willing to work with you. But they will not work with somebody who claims that the 2020 election was stolen, who voted against Joe Biden, who claims that climate change isn't real. You know, I mean, it's just these very, very toxic positions that these, you know, that both Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan are taking. There's no way any Democrat is going to vote for either one of those two. So, and I'm not sure that there's more than, you know, a handful of Republicans in the Republican conference that would be acceptable to the Democrats, and none of those people are standing up and saying, I want to be the leader. And frankly, none of them have, you know, a broad enough consensus. Here's what I think is really going on, Lamar. The Republican Party is not a governing party. They are an opposition party. They have given up, and this goes back to Reagan, they have given up any idea of governing. Their idea is the 9 most frightening words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. They want to tear down the American government. They don't want to build it up. They don't want to strengthen it. They don't want to reinforce it. They want to end it, or at least reduce it, as Grover Norquist said, to the point where it can be drowned in the bathtub. And so, you know, that is what they're accomplishing right now. By not having a Speaker of the House, it's kind of the coward's way out because there's nobody that you can specifically pin the blame on. But by not having a Speaker of the House, they will be able to shut down the government on November 17th. They will be able to go for months without, you know, any appropriations and with the government shut down. Therefore, they will be able to produce, you know, a severe recession starting early in 2024, starting early next year. That recession will echo all the way up until November of next year, which is when the election is. And Joe Biden will get blamed for the economic consequences of it. Everybody knows this. This is you know, none of this is any kind of secret or brilliant insight. This is conventional wisdom. And that's what I think the Republicans are going to do. I think they're going to continue playing these games and you know, and just basically keep the country locked up in gridlock. And right now they're keeping their heads down and you know, just letting Israel fill the news, you know, while they're doing nothing. But their goal, their long-term goal, is to kneecap our government. They want to end the major chunk of the American government. They want to end Social Security. They want to end Medicare. They want to end Medicaid. Hell, 12 Republican states have not even expanded Medicaid. They're refusing to even allow it, you know. So, and this is how I think that they're going to do it. Lamar, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Excellent question. 22 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, you know, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox exist? Like, you know, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. 24 minutes past the hour. Welcome back, picking up your calls. Well, actually, I've got a couple of quick stories here, and then I'll be picking up your calls. The first is this incredible solar storm. I find this just fascinating. There was an event in 1859. It preceded the Civil War. It was called the Carrington event. And it was this massive solar eruption that hit the world, hit planet Earth. And here's a description of it. The night sky lit up so bright that some people thought it was morning. Gold miners in the Rocky Mountains woke up at 1 a.m. to make breakfast and start their day. Birds began singing as if the sun had already risen. Telegraph systems worldwide went offline and no one could send a message. This was the most intense geomagnetic storm from the sun ever observed on Earth. It sent northern lights as far south as Florida and Central America, and it knocked out communication systems all around the world. And that was 1859. I mean, basically all we had was telegraph. Well, a new study that was released Monday of this week found that they were looking at ice cores and looking at old, kind of almost fossilized trees that went back more than 10,000 years ago. And they found that 14,300 years ago, and very much like the Carrington event, only 10 times larger. We had never known before that the sun could do this, but 10 times larger, which means that if the sun does this, it basically blows out all communication systems on Earth. Who knows? I mean, it might take out, most of the satellites. It could be a really big deal. Now, there's no indication that the sun's about to do this any day soon. But as the Dr. Ittner, a statistician at the University of Leeds in Britain, says, I certainly wasn't expecting anything as significant as this. Yeah. They, by the way, they found this by looking at not just carbon-14, but also beryllium-10, an isotope that is produced by these kinds of things. They also found radiocarbon levels tended to stay elevated for about a century, marking a period when the sun went quiet. So the sun had this huge eruption, and then it went quiet for about 100 years. Fascinating stuff. Meanwhile, General Michael Flynn is doing a national tour all around the country, the two-day festival that they held in Vegas very recently. With election denial, QAnon conspiracy theories, doomsday prophecies. The two-day festival was billed as a church revival. Quote, featured nearly 70 speakers who preached that vaccines are poisonous and will bring about the end of the world, that a cabal of global leaders is engaged in child sex trafficking. I think that's Matt Gaetz. And that the 2020 election was stolen. It's called the Reawaken America Tour. This is crazy stuff, really crazy stuff.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And in the context of this, radio host Stu Peters is calling for the execution of Anthony Fauci and Hunter Biden. This is how nuts these people are. Reading from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink by Thom Hartmann. And this is from Chapter 2, The Economy. The epigraph Woody Guthrie's saying, some men rob you with a six-gun, others rob you with a fountain pen. The title, the opening part of this chapter, The Coup of the Elites. The election of 1992 pitted Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. While Bush was running as a conservative who was compassionate enough to hope for 1,000 points of privatized non-governmental light, Clinton campaigned as an unabashed FDR, believing in government as a solution liberal. In language reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Square Deal and FDR's Progressive New Deal, Clinton proposed a new covenant between the U.S. government and U.S. citizens. In a speech at Georgetown University on October 23, 1991, he declared, "We've got to rebuild our political life before the demagogues and the racists and those who pander to the worst in us bring this country down. People once looked at the president and the Congress to bring us together, to solve problems, to make progress. Now, in the face of massive challenges, our government stands discredited, our people are disillusioned. There's a hole in our politics where our sense of common purpose used to be. To turn America around, we've got to have a new approach founded on our most sacred principles as a nation, with a vision for the future. We need a new covenant, a solemn agreement between the people and their government to provide opportunity for everybody, inspire responsibility throughout our society, and restore a sense of community to our great nation. A new covenant to take government back from the powerful interests in the bureaucracy and give it back to the ordinary people of our country. More than 200 years ago, our founding fathers outlined our first social compact between government and the people, not just between lords and kings. More than 100 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave his life to maintain the union that compact created. More than 60 years ago, Franklin Roosevelt renewed that promise with a New Deal that offered opportunity in return for hard work. Today, we need to forge a new covenant that will repair the damaged bond between the people and their government, restore our basic values, embed the idea that a country has the responsibility to help people get ahead, but that the citizens have not only the right, but the responsibility to rise as far and fast as their talents and determination can take them. And most important of all, that we're all in this together. We have to make good on the words of Thomas Jefferson, who once said, "A debt of service is due from every man to his country, proportional to the bounties which nature and fortune have measured to him." End of quote from Bill Clinton. Americans loved it. A majority of voters in 1992 were old enough to remember what America was like under the 1940 to 1981 New Deal era, when a single worker with a good job had health care, a pension, and could raise a family and buy a home. When the GI Bill educated millions, when hospitals and health insurance companies in nearly every state were required by law to be not-for-profit corporations, and health care was inexpensive and widely available. And they noticed that the 12 years of Reagan and Bush had begun the process of shattering that historic era, that the middle class was slipping away, the government had become remote and hostile rather than protecting the rights of workers and the middle class. Americans elected Clinton based on his FDR-style rhetoric. They were looking forward to a return to the golden age of America's middle class. They were ready for the new covenant, and apparently so was Bill Clinton. There is every sign that he actually believed his own rhetoric. On all this, he won the election in November and spent that month and December preparing his new covenant programs to restore the American middle class. Until January. As Adam Curtis brilliantly points out in a special documentary series he did for the BBC titled The Trap, a few weeks before Bill Clinton was to be sworn into office as President of the United States, he was visited by Goldman Sachs CEO Robert Rubin, who had just taken a $40 million paycheck for his last year with Goldman and would soon become the head of Clinton's economic team tasked with carrying out the new covenant, and with Alan Greenspan. Rubin and Greenspan sat the young new president down and told him the facts of life as they saw them. Clinton would not govern as an FDR liberal. Instead, he must cut government, promote free trade, and reduce regulation of business. Clinton complied and has been richly rewarded. In his second inaugural address, he declared the era of big government is over. The philosophy represented by Rubin and Greenspan doesn't believe in government as a solution to much of anything other than wars and crime. As true classical conservatives in the mold of Sir Edmund Burke and Thomas Hobbes, many modern libertarians and neoliberals don't even believe in democracy. As any libertarian will honestly admit, they call it the tyranny of the majority, or mob rule. Instead, because they believe in the inherently evil nature of most humans, they held that a small ruling elite of good people, the wise ones, must concentrate wealth and power, the first fuels the second by and large, in a small number of hands, out of the reach of what the first American conservative President John Adams called the rabble, us. They believed that social stability was more important than social mobility. As of this writing, the surest way to become wealthy in the United States or Britain is to be born to wealthy parents. The surest way to be poor is to be born to poor parents. Social mobility, the ability to move between classes for better or worse, has been rolled back from its highly fluid levels in the 1940 to 1980 years to a rigidity last measured in the 1920s as America was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. Conservatives, since Sir Edmund Burke's opposition to the Revolutionary War of 1776 to today's opponents of labor rights, believe that too much power and wealth in the hands of the middle class will inevitably lead to instability. The book, Threshold, The Progressive Plan to Take America Back from the Brink. Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke and all that kind of. You know, Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order. And, as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour. Nikki Haley is getting very, very weird. This is former UN ambassador, Trump UN ambassador Nikki Haley, who is now polling third place in the Republican primary, says that the left is supporting the beheadings. Here's the exact tweet. She posted this both on Facebook and Twitter. She says, I don't know how the left justifies the beheadings. I don't know how the left justifies 1,200 people dead. I don't know how the left justifies the torture. That's between them and God. I don't understand it, and I don't want to understand it. Nikki, there's nobody on the left who is supportive of this. Well, she knows that. I mean, obviously she knows that. This woman is not stupid. These are just lies. I mean, this is just like vicious political lies. John Cipher, the former CIA station chief in Moscow, he responded to her on Twitter. He said, stop it. Sometimes the politics of stupidity is really out of place. Civil rights attorney Andrew Laufer said, this is an incredibly ugly statement. The left is as appalled as anybody else. Christian conservative Meath Hayo said, Nikki, Hamas is not the left, and it is not leadership to equate your political opponents with Hamas. It doesn't unite the country like we need. And here's the thing, we are united. There's broad bipartisan agreement in support of Israel. Why are you trying to politicize this? The college professor Isaac Bailey, he's a journalist and a Nieman Fellow, he says, when people running for president flatly and proudly spread ugly lies designed to pit people against each other at a time as sensitive as this, it is almost diabolical. Meanwhile, the Times of Israel, just this morning, reported, and I quote, former U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday appeared to mock Israel for failing to anticipate the weekend Hamas onslaught and for not going on the offensive against Hezbollah amid several deadly clashes along its northern border. He also launched personal attacks against Prime Minister Netanyahu, who he accused of letting him down, and the defense minister. It goes on from there. Yep, it's the Republican way. Spit on your country. I mean, that's spit on the founding fathers. It's the GOP way. All right, let's pick up your calls here. Tim in Shelby Township, Michigan. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. We can't let this crisis go to waste. So the big thing we've got to do is push President, Vice President on down a steady force stating that support for Israel means support for Ukraine.
Yeah, Hakeem Jeffers has come out and said this, that the Democrats will not vote for any Israeli aid without attaching Ukrainian aid to it.
That's great. And they should be on TV. I've seen this new clown, Mike Laundrie or something from New York.
Yeah.
He's on TV a dozen times a day, every channel, everywhere, spouting, well, this is all the Democrats' fault.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There is no bottom for the GOP these days. It's really a tragedy. There just is no bottom. Nikki Haley just making crap up. I mean, it's just, this is somewhere between sad and infuriating. And the exact opposite of patriotic. It is trying to tear your country apart because another country is being torn apart. It's so wrong. Tim, thank you. Well said. Appreciate the call. Jeff in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Tom.
Yeah.
Tom, the one thing I wanted to bring up that I just haven't heard anybody talking about, and that's the failure of multiple administrations to use the leverage of being the largest contributor to Israel's defense. We have not pushed the Israeli government to treat Palestinians in a human way.
Yeah, it's true. To a large extent. The last president I recall talking like that was Jimmy Carter, although maybe Bill Clinton did. I'm not sure. But yeah, we send them $3 billion a year. We should be having some influence over, what's going on with the Palestinians. But I don't think right now is the time to be having that conversation, frankly. Although I get it that the NRA says whenever there's a shooting, we shouldn't discuss shootings, and I'm not trying to do that. But yeah, I get your point, Jeff.
I just think that we need to put context to this whole thing, and that America does bear some responsibility for the conditions in which the Palestinians are being oppressed.
I don't disagree with that. I would disagree with anybody who says that America bears some responsibility for what Hamas did. I don't think that the Palestinians bear responsibility for what Hamas did, and I'm horrified that the Palestinians are being punished for it. Although I get, that Russia's got to, they're trying to get these hostages back, and they're trying to root out Hamas, and I don't know how you do that. I mean, but the thing that's really shocking to me, like I said earlier, I just learned today, is that the leadership of Hamas is living in $1 million apartments and mansions in Qatar. And I mean, it's like, really? The world needs to unite to decapitate Hamas, in my opinion. Jeff, thank you for the call. Tony in Long Island, New York. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
I'm well.
I do agree. I do agree with what you were saying before, but I do have a question regarding the last spokesman that I recall for the Palestinians that had any teeth that was respected throughout the world. I believe he passed away in 2004. Was Yasser Arafat, and I believe he tried diligently to even to coordinate measures of peace with Yitzhak Rabin until he was assassinated in, I think, 95.
Although Arafat also, on 3 different occasions, if my memory is correct, blew up peace talks purely for his own political purposes to help consolidate power. Arafat was incredibly corrupt. There were, toward the end of his life, I believe he was, trying to pull something together, but. This is one of the problems, and this is, to the last caller, why are we not leaning on Israel to work with the Palestinians? Palestinians haven't had an honest broker, a decent leader for years. I mean, you've got the guy who's running the Palestinian Authority now, but he's in his 80s, and which is not to knock people in their 80s, but he's just not there. I mean, he's...
No, I haven't seen him at the forefront of anything, to be quite honest with you. But, I do have to agree to a certain extent. When somebody, and I've received a lot of flack for this, I expect to receive even more. But when you have a people that's lived basically in an open-air prison in 56 years of oppression, something like this was predictable.
Yeah, well, this is, this is what I wrote about on Monday. I said, or maybe it was Tuesday, I said this was predictable, but that is a big difference between the word predictable and the word justifiable.
No, I totally agree with that, okay? And I think Hamas basically took control over the Palestinians, if I recall correctly, because they didn't have an honest broker in there. And I don't know whether Hamas was the person that basically corrupted Yasser Arafat throughout the years, that he blew up some of those talks.
Well, part of it was that Arafat was competing with Hamas and Hezbollah. I mean, there were all these competing factions, among the Palestinians, right. and that became part of the mess as well. But Hamas is there, in large part because America and Israel, specifically Netanyahu, thought that pitting Palestinians against Palestinians was a slick, strategy. Separate the Palestinians in the West Bank from the Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but when you have a population that's, I think the age is roughly 30. The average age
of all people in Gaza are under 18 years old right now.
Right. So when you have people that are that young, that don't have any foresight, they don't really have any background as to what happened before. I mean, they're only following what's being put in front of them.
Right.
I mean, it's really obviously where they don't really have anything to base what they're doing on.
Yeah. No, it's a tough one. This is, once again, this is a complex situation. Tony, thank you. Excellent points all. Michael in San Bernardino, California. Hey, Michael, you wanted to speak to Kenyatta's question about Trump's accordion hands?
Yeah, I think I figured out what it is. It's called the Trump liometer, and in patent pending. The farther apart his hands are, the bigger the lie.
Well, that makes sense. It's sort of like the fisherman's, the fish was this big.
Bigger and bigger.
I love it.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's a great one, Michael. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
Great contribution to the conversation. It's 45 minutes past the hour. I'm picking up your phone calls here on this beautiful Thursday. Kind of actually, the weather's kind of crappy here in Portland, but that's, it's the fall. Hey, we're heading toward winter. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is your media support group for we the people of the United States of America. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Jeff in Snohomish, Washington. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? I just wanted to respond to the gentleman talking about people on food stamps. I work for a nonprofit in the Seattle area dealing with resources for the mentally ill, drug addicts, everything else like that. And I like to ask people, if someone presents that kind of attitude toward me about, like, everybody on food stamps is a lazy, no good, and they don't deserve this, I like to confront them with, would you really agree that there's anybody that deserves our help? And they usually say yes. There are some people, and the best response, well, then who decides that? Do we send out a ballot to everybody to decide who gets that?
Right.
No, we hire people to do that, and the people I know in that industry, they're not pushovers. They can spot someone scamming the system a mile away. So, and the big problem I see, and I see this directly, is the pay that these people get in the mental health field and the social workers is so much lower than everybody else that they have a hard time getting people in there. University of Washington had a study recently that workers in human services are paid 30% less than people with like educations. If it's a nonprofit, it's 37% less. And in other healthcare industries in general, they're 11% less. So a big problem we have dealing with homelessness and drug addiction and, the people living with poverty is we can't get good people to come in and work in those industries. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, I totally get it. When you can make $1 million a year in finance. Here's a quote, by the way, apropos of your comment of the point that you raised. This is a quote from Franklin Roosevelt. I think it's from his 1936 Philadelphia speech. He said, "Better the occasional faults of a government that lives in a spirit of charity than the consistent omissions of a government frozen in the ice of its own indifference."
Yeah.
I think that says the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jeff,
another irony is that if you went into the poorest communities in the country and just handed out $100 bills, you would stimulate the economy much stronger than any other thing you could do.
Well, that's another interesting point, and that is that when you give money to really poor people, they spend 100% of it, and that has a much greater economic stimulus than when you cut taxes or give money to rich people.
Yeah.
I also find it really weird that Republicans will argue that we need to incentivize our job creators. We need to give more money, more tax cuts, more deregulation, more breaks to the really rich people, because that makes them work harder. So giving rich people free stuff or extra money makes them work harder. But giving poor people money turns them into lazy people. In fact, when you look at the results of the universal basic income experiments all around the world, giving money to poor people actually increases the probability that they're going to get a job. It increases the probability that they're going to become productive members of society. It's the exact opposite of the worldview that that Republican caller had earlier, and that the GOP has been pushing, for the most of my lifetime, frankly. Jeff, thanks for the call. Excellent point. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay with us. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Are you feeling exhausted by Donald Trump? So many Americans, not just Donald Trump, the entire GOP. We've got this war on trans people. We've got a war on queer people. We've got a war on people of color, a war on voting. Young people concerned about climate change, and Republicans not only refusing to do anything about it, but like Marjorie Taylor Greene out there talking about how, oh, well, it's just normal variation, it's nothing to worry about. Just keep on shoveling that coal. People cutting pills in half because they can't afford their medicine. Parents who don't have enough money to properly dress their kids for school, even though they're working full-time. Seniors fearing that the Republican Party is going to finally succeed in killing off Social Security and Medicare. They're trying it again. It's this whole, yes, we'll raise the debt ceiling as part of cut Social Security. It's nuts. I got a whole op-ed about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 9 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls. Matthew in Long Beach, California. Hey, Matthew, what's up?
Yeah, good morning, Tom.
Hey.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, thank you, Matthew.
Yeah. Tom, I believe you had mentioned this on your show on Monday or Tuesday of this week, and you had mentioned the fact that Rupert Murdoch's father had come up with some sort of a scheme or plan or something of that nature to state that black GIs stationed in Australia were raping white Australian females during World War II.
That's correct. And there is a book about it, and I wrote about that last week in one of my op-eds in Hartmann Report, and I have the book sitting on my desk at home, but I can't remember the exact title. I'm sorry, or the author for that matter, but it's in my article, and there's a hot link to the book on Amazon in my article.
Okay, and I do get your Hartmann Report every day.
Yeah, so you can go back and look at the ones from last week. I think it was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of last week, maybe a little earlier than that, and it was in 1944. It was, during the war in the Pacific, and he was, it was Sir Keith Murdoch. Rupert was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. His father was very wealthy, and he was knighted. And Sir Keith owned the newspaper empire that Rupert inherited, that now his son Lachlan has inherited.
Okay, so my question is, has that story actually been confirmed, or was it just a rumor, or
no,
was it...
it's real. It's real. It's a real story, and yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, it's not widely known, but it's fairly well documented.
Okay, well, one of the other things that I would that's unfortunate, but one of the things that one of the other things that I would like to point out about that particular period of time, whether we're talking about the Pacific War or the war in Europe, that was a pretty common practice for GIs that were stationed in those countries, whether they were black GIs or white GIs.
To rape the local women?
Yes.
Well, according to this book, actually, there were some instances of rape, and that's what Keith Murdoch used to inflame people. But the one GI murdered, they actually took, there was one American GI who was killed as a result of this, and this is what precipitated the riots in several Australian cities. He was actually just having an affair with a married woman, and he was not black. But this was the thing that, set it off. But most of what Keith Murdoch was talking about was black GIs, and insinuating that they were all rapists.
Well, I think one of the things that needs to be left here in this somewhat unfortunate story is that, as I mentioned, GIs during World War II, whether they were stationed in England, white GIs, black GIs who were in the Pacific, they were also in Europe as well too. But that was not uncommon for white or black GIs.
I think it was relatively uncommon, and I have read several histories of World War II, and no, I don't think it's as common as you're characterizing at all, Matthew. In fact, there was a GI who raped a woman in Okinawa. Now, this was just, like 15 years ago, and it created an international incident, if you'll recall. So,
Tom, I think my point is that to leave the story out there that it was only black GIs during World War II that were raping white females is just not true.
No, you're right. It wasn't true. And as I said, it was, the riot that started was from a white GI. But my point was that the Murdoch empire, the Murdoch family, has a long history of trash-talking Americans in order to whip up, anti-American sentiment. And they're still doing it. They're still doing it on Fox News right now. Matthew, thank you for the call. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, I would like to talk about how pretty much all Republicans are morally bankrupt, especially the ones that try to, run our country.
For example?
Or think they, well, the hypocrisy as well. Now, first off, I'm all for Israel, 100%. And I'm also for Israel giving, the United States giving them their aid package every year. Now, that with that aid package, there's no strings attached. Now, here in our
we are also, by the way, I think it bears mentioning that, Israel's getting $3 billion a year. I believe Egypt is getting $2 billion. I might be wrong. It might be $3 billion. But we're giving aid to both of them, and this came out of the Camp David Accords. This was the deal that Jimmy Carter worked out. This was the cost to the United States of Israeli-Egyptian peace, basically.
That is correct. Now, our country, laws. Now, the Republicans are trying to instill laws on women, abortion, women's reproductive issues. They've been gouging out our school system.
Oh, they're trying to destroy public schools.
And yet they have no problem signing that check to Israel every year to where the same issues we want, they have no problem giving the money to them, which they do have women productive.
I don't want to tie those things together, Steve. I really think that foreign aid and foreign policy is kind of a separate category. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
book club today, we're reading from Edward Nell's new book, Progress and Poverty in Economics. The subtitle, Henry George and How Growth in Real Estate Contributes to Inequality and Financial Instability. This is from the introduction, which is subheaded, Reviving the Work of America's Most Original Economist. Andrew Mazzone and I collaborated on a project to review the work of the 19th century American economist Henry George, especially his landmark book, Progress and Poverty, 1879, to see how George's work stood up in the light of modern economics and to determine what could be brought up to date and applied to the contemporary world. We wanted to establish that George's work was relevant and also to criticize American academics, economists for having overlooked or rejected George both in his own time, when his work was a worldwide sensation, and afterward, even today. Andrew died suddenly in the middle of the project. This book is a tribute to him and completes what we began. George began his career as an author and public personality within poverty, arguing that progress brought poverty in its wake and that poverty might even outpace progress, an important original point of view that has not lost any of its relevance since George's time. In fact, in our age of burgeoning inequality, it may be more relevant today than ever before. The grounds for this paradoxical interlinking of progress and poverty lay in the effect of rising rents. For George, rents were payment, not for the use of land in the usual sense, but for pure access to specific places and locations. But why should some people have the right to limit others' access to the use of the earth? Surely it belongs to us all. Worse, the limiting of access by demanding payment would undermine the benefits of innovation and hard work. To prevent this linking of progress and poverty, George said a major policy shift in taxation was required. This is well known among economists as the Georgist single tax on rents, or the Henry George theorem. Since George's time, there has been progress both in the economy itself and in economic analysis. The economy has been growing, and growth models have become highly sophisticated, in many cases focusing on matters that were central to George a century earlier. But that progress has also led to poverty, obvious in the economy itself. Our mainstream economics is also poverty-ridden, stricken. Our analytical models do not explain the persistence of poverty very well, nor do they account for crises and crashes, let alone the recent and stubborn growth of inequality. The mainstream theory of income distribution, marginal productivity, which assumes diminishing returns for all these factors of production and the markets will coordinate their adjustment. Distribution is hopelessly flawed. George rightly rejected an early version of it. And contemporary economic theory has almost completely lost sight of rents and real estate, even though real estate was center stage in the global financial crisis of 2008, a crisis directly resulting from speculation in the housing market. And in 2016, Donald Trump, a real estate developer whose rise to power is intimately linked to rents and real estate speculation, was elected president. With a solid Republican majority in Congress, he began to implement a set of relentlessly regressive trickle-down economic policies that can be expected to lead to more poverty among vast segments of the population. Andrew and I wanted to find insights and tools in George's thought to counter this trend, to support progress and alleviate poverty. Before Andrew died, we had settled on 5 main points in George's writing that we wanted particularly to explore. 1, George emphasized cooperation as well as competition in regard to increasing productivity. He saw that the division of labor and cooperation as settlements developed on new land created value in location and generated increases in output while bringing about innovation. This is what generated the differentials on which rent is based, as we will explain. Number 2, George and his followers claimed that the total value of land in a region would tend to equal the value of the aggregate output of that region. 3, further, they claimed that total rents would tend to equal the costs of government, so that taxing rents would pay for government. And number 4, they contended that unless prevented by an activist government, inequality in wealth and income, roughly between the upper and lower classes, but also between other significant groups, would tend to rise inexorably. And number 5, and finally, George repeatedly attacked land speculation and its tendency to withdraw land from productive use and to promote concentration, a point that seemed to,
that seemed to both Andrew and myself to have a direct bearing on today's world. Only today it's not land alone, but finance generally that is subject to speculative excesses. I wrote up notes on theory while Andrew worked on rents, cost of government, land values, and GNP. I eventually put our notes together into two more or less finished articles to present at the annual conference of the Eastern Economics Association in New York City. Economists have given George short shrift, which is a shameful oversight. He has much to teach us. He was uniquely American, perhaps our greatest economist, certainly our most original. He is justly famous and heralded in the 19th century, and his book Progress and Poverty, which is the source for much of our analysis on these pages, was the best-selling book on economics of that entire century. The book Progress and Poverty in Economics by Edward Nell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the third hour of our program. Some interesting news here. The Supreme Court. Oh, by the way, yesterday I mentioned something. I just wanted to correct the record. Yesterday I mentioned that Black Lives Matter Chicago had posted something in support of Palestinians or in opposition to Israelis or whatever. Turns out that wasn't actually Black Lives Matter Chicago. It was a Twitter account that is called Black Lives Matter Chicago, but only represents one person. So just wanted to correct the record there. Black Lives Matter Chicago has come out and said, wait a minute, this is not us, this is not our position. So just FYI. Yesterday, the Supreme Court heard arguments in the case of South Carolina's radical racial gerrymander. This is the gerrymander that created the seat that Nancy Mace is currently occupying. That district went from being, basically a swing district that went back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. They went in and they took out basically most of the black people, or many of the black people, and moved them into other districts. It's called cracking and packing. And the result is that Nancy Mace won the last election by 14 points. It's now a solidly red district. This is the same thing with Jim Jordan's district in Ohio. If you've ever looked at a map, his district, it just wanders all over the place because they're just sucking up every little Republican vote they can find. So a federal court and a federal appeals court both found that this was a racial gerrymander. But the Republicans in South Carolina, sued at the Supreme Court and said, no, it's not racial. We weren't looking at black people. We were looking at registered Democrats, and we were trying to get Democrats out. Now, it just happens that those Democrats were all black people. But the Supreme Court, this is this grand exception that in the Shelby County case back in 2014, if my memory serves me correctly, John Roberts said, the fact that we've got a black president means that there's no longer racial discrimination in the United States, and therefore we're no longer going to, really enforce these kind of, racially based laws. And but to kind of dance around, but you've got laws in place, like the Voting Rights Act and whatnot that explicitly forbid you to use race as your principal tool when gerrymandering and when, anything else, trying to prevent people from voting, basically. So what the Republicans are doing now is they're saying, oh, was that a black community? We didn't notice that. We just saw that it was 80% Democratic. We didn't realize it was black people. Wink, wink, nod, nod. And Sam Alito was so gung-ho for keeping in place these racial gerrymanders that had been struck down by a federal district court and by a three-judge panel in the federal appeals court. He was so gung-ho to keep this map in place that he kept interrupting people yesterday during the hearings. And John Roberts, by the way, was going along with him. So it looks like, in all probability, this racial gerrymander in South Carolina is going to stand. We won't know for a few months, you know, when the final decision comes out, but you can generally tell where the justices stand based on how they ask questions and what they're trying to get on the record to justify the decision that they've got that's coming down the road. Meanwhile, speaking of voting and the Republicans, in Virginia, Virginia's got an election, you know, this November, and they're already voting. 45 days of advance voting, of early voting here. And people have already started voting in Virginia. And so there is this army of right-wing poll watchers that they have pulled together. They do it under the rubric of what they call Virginia Fair Elections, VFE. And this group is fielding poll watchers to, you know, essentially intimidate people, particularly black people, when they show up at the polls. Who are you? How, you know, prove to me that you have a right to vote here. That kind of stuff. I mean, this is the stuff that was pioneered back in the day by William Rehnquist, who, you know, parlayed that all the way up to being Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court when he was a Republican operative in the 1960s in Phoenix. And he would go to the rural areas of Arizona and challenge Hispanic and Native American voters. And, you know, now they're doing this in Virginia. And now that they had some success with this, with the 2021 election in Virginia. You know, it's how Glenn Youngkin got elected. And so now they're going to try and do it again. And in fact, they're trying to export it to other states. They're calling it the Virginia model. But they have trained, they are trying to train or have fielded 4,500. They had 4,500 trained volunteers during the 2021 election. And this time they are trying to train or trying to field 14,000 volunteers to intimidate people at the polls. Fascinating stuff. I mean, this is the Republican strategy, right? The Virginia Democratic Party's spokesperson, a fellow by the name of Mukherjee, told the New York Times, quote, "This is sort of like death by 1,000 cuts." He said he's the voter protection director for the Virginia Democratic Party, Aaron Mukherjee. He told the Times, quote, "Taken together, the goal is to disenfranchise enough voters that they can win the election." You know, I keep telling you, people don't, generally speaking, you know, don't want to vote for Republicans except for rural white people. And so, you know, if they're going to win elections, they've got to cheat. Meanwhile, and this is just insane, the Republicans are using this, the war in Israel to drum up a fake climate controversy. These are headlines from Fox News from the last 2 days. Kirby, John Kirby is the administration's kind of point man for foreign policy, you know, the spokesperson. He's a Biden official. Here's what happened, actually. Let me give you the backstory first. John Kirby was being interviewed by Fox News about what's going on in Israel. The Fox News reporter asked Kirby a very specific question. This is, he's the National Security Council spokesperson, the White House National Security Council. This is Martha McCollum, and she asked Kirby if he stood by his previous comments calling climate change the greatest existential threat to humanity, bar none, and calling climate change more frightening than a nuclear war. Kirby answered. Now, she asked about climate change. Keep this in mind. She asked about climate change. And so Kirby answered about climate change. He said, yes. He said, I don't know. He said, climate change actually threatens and is capable of wiping out all human life on Earth over time. I don't know how more existential you can get than that, but that doesn't mean that we walk away from our obligations or from our national security interests. Reasonable response, right? Here are the headlines on Fox News. Kirby stuns Fox News host as he said Biden believes climate change bigger threat than nuclear war after Iran proxy army Hamas forces war on Israel. Biden, climate change more frightening than war. Kirby confronted on recent Biden claim that climate change is the only existential threat as Hamas bombs Israel. White House, Biden absolutely stands by saying climate change is the only existential threat. Basically what they're doing is they're They're trying to gin up this fake controversy to trash talk climate change. Fox News, the Republicans over at Fox News, and I don't get why, Rupert Murdoch is so in on this. I get it. He's a billionaire and his family are billionaires and he inherited all this money in these newspapers from his father. And I guess now it's his son who's making these decisions. But they don't own, to the best of my knowledge, coal mines. They don't own oil wells. Why is the Fox empire so committed to trash talking climate change? I get why Republicans in Congress are. They're getting all this money from fossil fuel billionaires. In fact, most of the infrastructure, the Republican infrastructure, or at least the conservative infrastructure in America, maybe not most, but certainly much of that infrastructure was put into place by the Koch brothers, who are fossil fuel billionaires back in the day, right? And still, Americans for Prosperity and, all this kind of stuff. So I get why they would want to lie about climate change. But the Murdoch empire? I don't get this at all. Finally, just an absolutely fascinating story. The Department of Justice is suing eBay for selling rolling coal devices. It's a $5,580 fine under the Clean Air Act to modify a car or sell equipment to modify a car that can be used to get around clean air standards. And this is clearly a violation of clear air standards, having diesel trucks, having a button you can push and suddenly it's just pouring, black smoke out the back so that you can pull in front of a Prius and nuke them with your black smoke. What blew my mind was that the Department of Justice is alleging that eBay has sold more than 343,000 of these things. I didn't realize there were that in America. I'm just astonished. eBay denies the charges, saying they've blocked more than 99.9% of the listings for these products, including millions of listings every year. Wow, this is a big business. In addition to rolling coal products, the prosecutors argue that eBay also allowed the sale of more than 5,600 dangerous methylene chloride paint removers and at least 23,000 prohibited pesticide products, both of which are banned by the EPA for their safety hazards. Incredible. Just incredible. It's really kind of shocking, kind of sad and kind of shocking to contemplate that, there are others among us who think that pouring cancer-causing poisonous smoke in the face of other Americans as a political statement is somehow acceptable, is somehow even, noble or funny or cool. It blows my mind.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break, and we'll continue with that through the rest of the hour. What's on your mind today? 17 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. John in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'd like to see the Democrats, any Democrat that gets a microphone put in front of their face, to mention the Putin-Iran alliance when they're questioned about, anything that has anything to do with Israel right now.
Yep.
That needs to be hammered in. And by doing that, that's the only way you're going to get the uninformed people, right?
Well, also the Putin-Hamas alignment.
The misinformed people are reliable voters. Those are the people that need to be converted. The uninformed people may or may not show up to the polls. I think people waste a lot of time trying to, speak policy to people that are uninformed.
Yeah.
Even if they get it, they're not reliable voters.
Right.
The misinformed, the Trumpers, they're going to show up at the polls. We need to convert as many of them as we can. I know it sounds impossible, but it's the bumper sticker stuff that will work.
Yep.
That's what turned them into Republicans.
Yep.
That's what will turn them back into Democrats.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, John. It's an excellent point. Thank you very much for calling and making it. That was a good one. Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Well, it's good to be back with you, Tom. We've talked many times. Maybe it's encouraging that it's hard to get a hold of you, so you're getting more viewers, I guess. Right?
I guess so, yeah. So what's up?
Hey, it's all about demographics and market share. That's how the world operates, Believe me. Anyway, it's funny. The Democrats just don't understand the Republican mentality. The most important things that are happening in this country for the Trump base is the Houston Astros and the Texas Rangers are heading towards the World Series. You got the Dallas Cowboys losing to the 49ers, those in San Francisco, which is an absolute travesty. And then you've got Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. People don't understand the economic influence of every Saturday. It's hundreds of thousands of people per stadium in college football, and the same thing for professional football. The effect that has on the economy is just dramatic,
Yeah.
And that's what the Trump supporters are thinking about. They couldn't care less about what's happening in Israel, other than the fact that they're going along with Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of those guys who the anti-Semitic tirades over the years.
Right.
So the Muslim terrorists and the Jews are being killed, and then you got Fox News talking about all the Mexican rapists currently coming across the border. You see what I mean? That's the mentality.
Yeah, I saw a cartoon yesterday that had a picture of Marjorie Taylor Greene with a thought balloon, and in the thought balloon, she was thinking, why isn't Israel using the Jewish space lasers?
Right. Well, there you go. Then you understand how that operates.
Yeah.
That's the mentality. There's, the lack of education over the last couple of generations, and a lot of that had to do with the Reagan administration. I have a wonderful education. I have friends who are teachers and stuff, and they're scared, Tom.
Yeah.
Across this country, the educational system is going down.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
people that are their jobs are being threatened. Putting things in historical context is disappearing. You've got the southern states want to get rid of child labor laws so they can actually build a Trump base. You see what I mean? Uneducated kids who don't have to worry about going to school and learning anything, and then what they end up doing is put them into jobs, 8 hours a day at 14 years old, so they can come home and watch Fox News, basically.
Yeah, that's what Sarah Sanders just did. We've got now 3 Republican states that have basically blown up their child labor laws. It's
absolutely. Georgia was the first thing, and they're all headed in that direction.
Yeah, and they claim to be the party of morality. Right. Tim, thanks for the call. Well said. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans have been pushing legislation and ideas that would basically crash the economy. And a lot of people are kind of scratching their heads going, why would Republicans who basically are owned by billionaires and big corporations, why would they want to crash the economy? Doesn't that hurt billionaires and big corporations? In fact, no, it doesn't. Billionaires and big corporations actually get richer and more profitable during economic crashes. The largest fortunes in America were made during the Great Depression, or some of them. Joe Kennedy, J. Paul Getty, they made a fortune because it was a buying opportunity. Everything was cheap because everything had crashed, so they were buying up stock and buying houses. They had cash. Also, they have more negotiating power with unions, with workers, with their vendors. There's all kinds of benefits to billionaires and big corporations of having a crash. So don't think the Republicans won't do it. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 23 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. And picking up your calls here, Blake in Portland. Hey, Blake, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, good to hear you again. It's been a couple of years, but I didn't like to hear that you said it's complicated in Israel and the West Bank. Like, it's not very complicated when you talk about the haves and the have-nots. And every story, including the troubles here in America, are a lot about the haves and have-nots, the CEOs and the common worker. But I know that the Palestinians like to do things really brutally, and Muslim Islamic terrorism is we're not taught. All these young people, so many young people, the hate is going to be generational and generational.
There it is.
More aid, more. Yes, exactly. And so we know. I mean, in all the prophecies, these scientific prophecies, we're going to run out of water in 50 years. It's going to start in the east and move across to the west. Like, if Biden doesn't step in to make a peace accord right fucking now, I just don't know.
I'm sorry, we can't use language like that on the air, Blake. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Tom, is there any way you could just put me on hold and come back to me, please?
Say that again? Oh, put you on hold and come back to you? Okay, I'll do that, Charles. No problem. Lois in Sacramento, California. Hey, Lois, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. So, I live in a predominantly white area. It's probably about 2% of anyone else. I go to the gym with all Caucasian people. I go to the library, all Caucasian people. Basically, everything I participate in, they're all white. So we have conversations, and I talk to them to try to, kind of hear what their point of views are.
In other words, you're not white.
No, I'm African American.
Okay, thank you.
I thought you could tell from my voice.
Well, Southern accents, you can't, can't always tell. But anyhow, keep going, Lois.
Okay, so here's what I'm hearing from them, and it's everyone I talk to. We're all Social Security people, okay? So then when I tell people, pay attention and make sure you vote because they're trying to really do something with Social Security, and we're not going to be happy. And they're like, oh, they're not going to take that away from us. They're not going to do this. They don't believe it. And I'm wondering, is it because of their life and, their situation? And I don't know, because they're just not thinking about it. And this is quite a few people that have said the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not going to take that away from us.
Well, you're talking to older white people, and that's the demographic of Fox News. You'll recall when Joe Biden last spoke at a joint session of Congress, his State of the Union address in February, he came out and he said, there's Republicans here who want to end Social Security. And they all stood up and booed and yelled at him. And he said, oh, well, you don't want to end Social Security. Wonderful. 6 months later, the Republicans were proposing to end Social Security, to privatize it. But, that didn't get anywhere near as much publicity as all the Republicans saying, oh, we would never do that. And, of course, it didn't get covered on Fox News. So I think what you're looking at, Lois, I mean, the next question to ask people is, where do you get your news? I think you may be surprised.
Well, I know already. The one across from me is Newsmax and didn't realize Social Security, we had it because of socialism. And I said that was a socialist program. And she looked at me like I was crazy. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I just always thought certain groups of people got a better education than I.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Lois, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thanks so much for the call. It's nice to hear from you. 27 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery, by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath. I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice I said to the people, "You cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human." Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. "You are not welcome here," he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra. From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. So why is it that Republicans insist on calling Democrats communists? I mean, this is all over the place. You know, Donald Trump recently said, we're going to deny entry all communists and Marxists. Now, the real problem is, what do we do about the ones we already have who happen to be politicians? Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Shifty Schiff. Ted Cruz told Fox News, Joe Biden has handed the agenda over to the socialists. And not just the socialists, this is now the communists. Today's Democratic Party believes in violence. They believe in mob rule, just like the communists and Marxists. And he goes on. Ron DeSantis, same thing. You see at a college campus, students flying the hammer and sickle from the old Soviet Union flag. There are no communists left in America of any consequence. There's certainly not a single elected communist. But we do have a really serious fascism problem in America. I wrote about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Why American Fascists Label All Who Oppose Them as Communists. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Chaz in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Chaz, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. This isn't, breaking news or anything, just kind of more just big picture stuff. I noticed a pattern for a while that's been bothering me. Trying to think of one thing that MAGA Republicans are for that does not benefit our adversaries. And I can't think of anything. I drew a Venn diagram and it turned into just one big circle with no overlap.
So what are, in your list, what are the things that the MAGA Republicans are in favor of?
I mean, really everything from current events with the eerie quick to decide side with this complicated conflict in the Middle East. Everything. I could go down the list, even in terms of gun control. Yeah. I could go down the list, but basically every single thing that Trump or MAGA politicians have been for, I think, does this benefit us or our adversaries? And every time I can't think of anything. So
a child in Mississippi is 10 times more likely to be killed with a gun than a child in Massachusetts. You've got 12 Republican-controlled states, MAGA-controlled states that have not expanded Medicaid, including Texas and Florida, huge chunks of America, where people just don't have access to health care if they're low income. COVID, you're right. Red counties. If you lived in a red county, you were twice as likely to die from COVID as if you lived in a blue county.
I can't think of anything. And what it leads me to is thinking of Citizens United and how political bribery can greatly weaken our national security.
Yeah, it absolutely has.
Kind of the pattern, big picture. If somebody can think of something that I'm wrong about, I'd love to know because I've been racking my brain for a while.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a variation on the contest that I've been running on this program for 20 years, which is if you can name one piece of legislation that was authored by Republicans, that was passed but with a Republican majority in the House, a Republican majority in the Senate, and signed into law by a Republican president that benefits the average working American instead of wealthy people, you win a prize. I'll send you, an autographed copy of any one of my books. But nobody's ever won that. One guy won that prize with the, and I'm not even certain of this, but I sent him a book, and that was the law that outlawed robocalls. That was authored by the Republicans. But there are people who say that law was actually on behalf of the robocall industry, the legitimate part of the robocall industry, trying to put out of business their competition from the illegitimate half of the robocall industry. But, creating that do not call list, that was a Republican initiative. But that's the only thing that anybody's ever come up with. I mean, literally, the only thing. In 20 years, I've been doing this.
Yeah, I've been listening to you since early Air America days and contributing to Free Speech TV as of late. And I appreciate everything. And, I thought about kind of the parallel there, but it keeps coming up every, new press conference or vote or, with the speaker issue or just everything that comes up lately. It seems like it benefits our adversaries.
Everything
and I
is
don't know if
designed
there
to
is a
screw
connection to
America.
political bribery.
Yeah. I'm with you. Chaz, thank you. Excellent point. Thank you very much. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, you better now?
Yes, I'm better now.
Okay, so what's up?
My statement is basically this.
Charles, I need you to, your voice is all muffled. I'm not sure why, but I need you to get your mouth right next to the microphone.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I was just thinking, to me, this is no less than what you would describe as legislative terrorism. Basically,
what is?
We have people, what they're doing in the House. It's
I
totally
see.
criminal.
Okay.
I don't even think they'll have somebody by the end of this weekend. I promise you that. And if not, like I called you last week. No, it was last week, and I asked Representative Program, are we gonna, have any? Would he, at least have a town hall meeting? We want to get our people in, and we want people to voice their, their concerns, and not only that, but the disheartenment of what's happened to their voice.
Right.
Basically, it's been kidnapped or taken hostage.
Yeah.
And that's why I call it legislative, terrorism.
Yeah, legislative terrorism. I'm telling you, the Republicans are quite happy not to have a Speaker of the House right now.
Come on. Uh-huh.
November 17th is D-Day. That's the day that our government shuts down, or the day after. And they're whistling past the graveyard here. I don't get it. Charles, thank you. Spot on. Mike in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Mike, what's up? What's on your mind today?
Hey, good. I never thought I'd be a caller on your show, but I do appreciate your show a lot.
Thank you.
I just wanted to bring to your attention some of the things that you've been mentioning about Israel. What's gone on and there is nothing but evil. I have to admit that. But last night on the NewsHour, there were an Israeli and a Palestinian peace think tank spokespersons.
Mm-hmm.
The Israeli, of course, was, very upset, and as he should be, but he said it's a zero-sum game, which basically means it's them or us. Whatever happens is going to happen, but we have the power. The Palestinian brought up, not a Middle East scholar, like most Americans, you pay a little bit of attention to it, but not a lot. And he brought up some things I didn't know. One, which you mentioned earlier, that like 40% of the population is under 20, and they're densely populated inside the Gaza Strip. But the thing that struck me was he said the average household income in Gaza was $1,000 a year,
right,
where the average income in Israel is $53,000 a year.
Right.
And so, in fact, he said you've got a cauldron of discontent. You've got evil people stirring it up, and something's going to happen, predictably.
Yeah. Not necessarily this horror, but predictably something would happen. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. And he even admitted it was evil. He was not supportive of what had gone on. The Palestinian wasn't.
Well, I think the Palestinians are genuinely, most Palestinians are genuinely horrified by what's going on. They are paying the price here for what Hamas did.
Exactly, and that's what he brought that up as well. But I go back to when I was a kid, 1967, I think, was the Israeli war. We've had 60 years, roughly, to try to work this situation out to help that place economically and other things.
Right.
And we spent billions of dollars, but yet nothing's occurred. It's just gotten worse.
Oh, so we have given billions, and Israel has given billions of dollars to Hamas on the promise that they would develop Gaza, that they would, start businesses, that they would, turn it into a functioning place. And instead, what did they do? They bought 15,000 rockets.
Exactly, and I think therein lies and I don't know what the solution is, and I wouldn't pretend to suggest one.
Yeah.
But what's gone on hasn't worked in 60 years, and so there needs to be some better thought processes, because what they did here is nothing but dastardly evil.
Yeah.
Evil.
I'm with you, Mike. I think ultimately we need UN peacekeepers in here, and we need international development, and we need to get the Arab world involved. The fact that the head of Hamas and the senior leadership of Hamas are yucking it up in Qatar right now in their $1 million apartment, watching TV and driving around in their Bentleys and Rolls Royces, is just crazy making. I mean, it's just...
You're absolutely right. And I really appreciate you bringing that out today. Like I said, there's a whole lot about that place, that area, that most Americans don't know,
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Most Americans are, largely ignorant of anything outside the United States. And sadly, too many Americans are ignorant of what's going on in the United States itself. Mike, thank you for the call.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, spot on. Good talking to you. It's 44 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. I'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Death toll so far in this Israeli-Hamas war is 2,700. Odds are it's actually much, much higher than that, and it's going to just start exploding here fairly soon. And welcome back, Dave in Brooksville, Florida. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, from listening to all the boilerplate rhetoric from bottom feeders like Nikki Haley, for whom no lie or double standard or smear campaign is beyond limits of her slime trail. I mean, if you were gullible enough to buy into her special brand of toxic and petty hate, you'd probably believe that the Democrat Party, which is overwhelmingly supported by American Jews, is a wing of Hamas. But anyway, I digress. I'm not trying to offer up some kind of sophistry justifying an act of terrorism by Hamas, but consider this. The last time I was in Israel, I had dinner at a classic landmark, world-famous hotel in Jerusalem known as the King David Hotel.
I've been there.
It became world famous, as you probably know, on July 22nd, 1946.
Yep, when it was blown up by... Yep, go ahead.
Irgun planted a bomb on the ground floor, which blew an entire wing of the hotel to bits, killing 91 people of various nationalities, and it was considered to be one of the most heinous acts of terror in the 20th century. The ringleaders of that terrorist attack became premiers of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir and Menachem Begin.
Right.
The moral of the story is as old as the Bible. Anytime you have a group that refuses to concede the same rights, privileges, and opportunities to another group that it assumes for itself, you're going to have a bloody conflict. So if some people really want to put America first, I hope the media and politicians can put their self-serving hypocrisy and their double standards and their devious propaganda featuring dead babies, decapitated, and Muslim bogeymen aside, at least long enough to actually start to work out a real solution and not a final solution for the Palestinians. Because clearly what we've got from the latest episode here is the Palestinians simply showing us that they know that they have nothing to lose, and it's just going to keep getting worse and getting worse, including dragging the United States in even deeper.
Well, keep in mind, Dave, you've got 2 million people in Gaza, and the force that was used for this invasion of Israel was a couple thousand people. I mean, a couple thousand people, dancing to the tune of Hamas is not representative of Gazans. It's not representative of Palestinians in general. This was a terror squad, and they were, by the way, being funded in part and led by the Hamas leadership, which is in Qatar. We're subsidizing, essentially.
Right. Well, keep in mind, also, for all those low-tax Trumpers and small government folks, remember that for every $300 Katyusha rocket that Hamas shoots at Israel, the Iron Dome missile to intercept it costs American taxpayers $40,000.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the price. The fact of the matter is that Israel is a democracy in that region. It's one of the only democracies in that region, and just like we need to be supporting, in my opinion, we need to be supporting Ukraine. It is a democracy being attacked by people who are not a democracy. Israel is a democracy too, but that doesn't mean that you don't talk to your friends, as it were, and say, hey, get your act together here. We need, like you said, we need a lasting solution here, not a final solution. Thank you, Dave. It's 48 minutes past the hour. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag You're It. Fort Lauderdale, Florida recently got whacked with 25 inches of rainfall in less than 7 hours. Tornadoes are tearing up the South and the Midwest in ways that they haven't seen, frankly, ever before. I mean, there have always been tornadoes, but not like these. 200-mile-an-hour winds, these derecos that are a mile long. We have a serious crisis going on right now. There's also a major El Nino. It's off the coast of Peru right now. It's affecting the West Coast. So we're seeing wild swings from drought to floods to drought to floods in the West Coast. Climate change is here. Climate change is real, and climate change is a crisis. What do we know about it? What do we know about these things? How much worse is it going to get before it might get better? What can we do about it? We had a long conversation with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. There's a whole long rant about this over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. 10 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls. Marie in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Marie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Quick side note from what I was going to call about. For those who've never listened to a Supreme Court argument, you were talking earlier about the case that was just argued regarding the South Carolina gerrymandering case. The justices are not generally trying to convince themselves. So when they're asking questions, those questions are really geared towards eliciting an answer that is going to convince another jurist. Or if they are unaware, and I suspect they're not, I've never been a Supreme Court clerk, so I couldn't say, but if they're unaware of who's going to be writing the opinion, it may be to call out a specific issue that they want the opinion writer, whoever's drafting for the majority, to bring up.
Yep.
So just wanted to
Yeah, stuff they want to get on the record, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Excellent point.
You know, Tom, you always talk about how despair is not an option and we've got to get active and so on and so forth. And I'll be honest, for those of us who have been in the fight and have been paying attention, you know, the Project 2025 doesn't really come as much of a surprise. If you've been watching the trajectory of things in the Republican Party, this is, we might be at the end point of, you know, the end game of their plans. Long story short, if despair is not an option, we've got to get active. In order to fight the sorts of things, this Virginia model that they plan to roll out all around the country where people's eligibility to vote is challenged, the thing we've got to do is be prepared. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to, from time to time, raise this issue and call around and make sure that people are acting on it. If you live in a place where you've got to be a citizen to vote, well, which is everywhere, have your birth certificate, have your passport. If you're naturalized, have your naturalization papers. If you have to prove your name, obviously birth certificate, but also adoption certificate or marriage certificate or divorce decree. And those are things that may have to be ordered from other states. So give yourself plenty of time because a lot of public agencies have reduced their staffing and it's taking a lot longer to get these things.
Excellent point.
And, you know, for those who have money challenges, it may take a little bit of time to put together the money to get these things. Yep. Criminal record. Now is the time for those who have had criminal records that would potentially prevent them from voting. If they've had those records expunged, if they've been restored, their voting rights have been restored. Again, now is the time. The fierce nature of now is the time that people need to be working on these things so that when you get to the polls or when you're approaching the time for the election, you're not worried if somebody challenges me, can I find these things or can I get them in time?
Exactly. And here's how this works. And I don't know for sure that this is how it works in Virginia, but I know that this is how it works in multiple red states. And that is that if you're standing in line to vote and somebody comes up and challenges your right to vote, you know, just says, prove to me that you're a citizen. At that point, under some states' laws, the people running the voting operation have to reconfirm your eligibility. In other words, they've got to say to you, okay, show me your birth certificate, show me those documents. Mm-hmm. And most people, as you point out, Marie, don't carry them with them. And that's why these 15,000 or 14,000 voter challenging people in Virginia assuming that Virginia has a law similar to that. That's how they can be so effective. This is what Rehnquist used to do in Arizona. And people just get turned away, or they get given a placebo ballot, a provisional ballot, which never gets counted because their vote has been challenged. And the vote challengers can be entirely selective. They can just stand there and challenge every black person, or they can overwhelmingly show up in heavily Democratic neighborhoods and not even go to heavily Republican neighborhoods. I mean, this is how this works, and it's insidious. And you're absolutely right, Marie. The only way to deal with it right now, because the Supreme Court has repeatedly said that this is just fine with them, the only way to deal with it right now is to have all those documents in your back pocket. Marie, thank you so much for that. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to speak to the earlier caller about food stamps. Maybe he never married someone who would threaten their preschool children that he was going to throw them out into the night where the monster, or at another time, pick them up and shake them like a rag doll, and you suddenly realize this kid isn't going to survive if I don't do something. This kid is going to run when he reaches 10 or 12, and you'll never see him again. So I did do something. I left with a single suitcase and a box of stuffed toys. I started my life over. And yes, I needed food stamps for a while. My parents helped me. We got on our feet. I worked a full-time and 2 part-time jobs for about 20 years. I'm nearly 74 in a couple weeks, and I still work full-time. So if he thinks people using food stamps are lazy, he needs to get a clue, get off of his Republican high horse, and recognize that not all people have the luxury of a loving set of parents to watch over your children and a job that is given to you because you had the benefit of a college degree.
Yeah, that is so eloquently stated, Sandra, and you are so right. There is a casual cruelty associated with these people who, are just constantly trying to trash poor people. It's just, or people in crisis. It's just terrible. Sandra, thank you so much for the call. Thank you for saying that so well and for sharing your personal story. It's got to be tough. Thank you. Thanks for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Anything Goes Friday. It's just going to be you and me for all 3 hours. We're going to have fun. So, or it'll be interesting anyway. So in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, and stay safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say